Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born in Arkham and raised by the Joker. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Arkham Asylum didn't circulate, it steeped. It was a thick, stagnant soup of antiseptic, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of old, desperate fear. For 10-year-old Izuku Midoriya, it was simply the air he breathed. The distant, rhythmic dripping from a leaky pipe in the West Wing was his metronome, the sudden, unhinged shrieks his birdsong. This was his world, his school, his home. He sat on a small, overturned bucket in the shadows of Observation Room 3B, a space so thick with dust and neglect that even the orderlies forgot it existed. A one-way mirror, streaked with grime, offered a perfect, secret view into the therapy room below. Izuku's small, unkempt frame was still, his wide green eyes, so unlike the jaded or crazed eyes that surrounded him, were fixed on the scene. He was not watching, he was dissecting. In the room, a portly man named Oswald Cobblepot, whom everyone called the Penguin, was weeping theatrically into a handkerchief. Opposite him, a young, earnest therapist, Dr. Eris, leaned forward, his face a mask of sympathetic concern. I want to be a legitimate businessman, Doctor, Penguin sobbed, his voice a gravelly warble. But society, it won't let me. The prejudice, the mockery. They see the monocle, the umbrella, and they judge. Izuku's brow furrowed. His small fingers, stained with ink from his latest lesson, tapped a silent rhythm on his knee. He wasn't listening to the words. The words were dressing. He was watching the details, just as he'd been taught. Lesson 4. The body cannot lie as well as the mouth. Penguin's left eye, the one not hidden by the monocle, wasn't red from crying. It was dry, and it kept darting towards the clock on the wall. His shoulders, shaking with supposed sobs, were too rhythmic, too controlled. The hand holding the handkerchief was clenched, not with grief, but with impatience. A low, sibilant whisper tickled Izuku's ear, smelling of cheap cologne and something acridly chemical. Well, my little straight man? What's the diagnosis? Izuku didn't flinch. The sudden appearance of the Joker was as normal to him as the sunrise was to other children. The man's lanky, purple-suited form unfolded from the deeper shadows behind him, a Cheshire grin splitting his chalk-white face. The grin didn't reach his eyes. Those were like chips of green glass, glittering with a terrible, consuming amusement. He's lying, Izuku said, his voice a quiet murmur, barely disturbing the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from a boarded-up window. Oh, everyone lies, Deku, the Joker chuckled, the nickname a constant, grating reminder of his supposed uselessness, a name twisted from its original meaning into something cruel. To the Joker, Deku meant a puppet, a blank mannequin, a thing to be ridden upon. That's the opening line of the joke. But what's the tell? Be specific. The punchline is in the details. His breathing, Izuku explained, pointing a small finger at the mirror. When you're really sad, your breathing hitches in your chest. His is coming from his stomach. He's performing. His eyes are watching the clock because his meeting with the guards union rep is in 10 minutes. He bribed them for extra fish on the menu. The crying is to shorten the session so he's not late. The Joker's grin widened, a grotesque crescent in the gloom. He clapped his hands, a sound like gunshots in the silence. Ha! Yes. Perfect. You see, the good doctor thinks he's peeling an onion, but Oswald's just a hollow ball of tissue paper. All performance, no substance. He leaned in close, his hot, foul breath washing over Izuku. And the doctor? What's his flaw? Izuku's gaze shifted to Dr. Eris. He wants to believe it, he said simply. He wants to be the one who fixes someone. His hope is his blind spot. It's a vulnerability. The Joker threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a jagged, broken noise that clawed at the ears, a sound that promised pain and chaos in equal measure. He ruffled Izuku's unruly green-black hair with a gloved hand. The gesture was meant to look fatherly, but the leather was cold, and the grip was just a little too tight. My boy, my beautiful, brilliant boy. You see it. You finally see it. Heroism, hope, betterment, it's all a setup. It's the long, boring story the comedian tells before he gets to the good part. And we, my dear Deku, we are the punchline. He stood up, stretching like a preening cat. Lessons over. Time for practical application. He led Izuku out of the observation room and down a hallway where the lights flickered with terminal indecision. This was Izuku's classroom. His family were the inmates, his tutors in the mad arts. His first stop was the library, a place that smelled of decaying paper and neglect. It was the domain of Edward Nigma, the Riddler. Nigma, perpetually twitching in his green, question-mark-covered jumpsuit, saw Izuku's mind as the only worthy opponent in the asylum. He didn't teach reading, he taught ciphers. Riddle me this, little acolyte of anarchy, Nigma said, his eyes wide and manic. I have cities, but no houses. I have mountains, but no trees. I have water, but no fish. What am I? Izuku, who had never seen a mountain or a proper city, had to rely on pure logic. He thought about the words, the structure, the trick. A map, he answered instantly. Nigma's face contorted in a mix of fury and delight. Correct. Too easy. Your mind is a blade, child. Don't let the clown dull it with his crude explosives. Next, Joker would drop him off at the infirmary's abandoned chemical wing, where Dr. Jonathan Crane resided. Scarecrow didn't see a child. He saw a fascinatingly blank test subject. While Joker forbade any direct experimentation, you don't break a toy you're still building. Crane was allowed to lecture. Surrounded by beakers and tubes filled with murky amber liquids, Crane's voice, muffled by his sackcloth mask, was dry and academic. Fear is not an emotion, child. It is a biological response, an evolutionary weapon. The amygdala is flooded with signals, heart rate increases, pupils dilate, a cascade of delicious, predictable chemicals. He would hold up a vial. The Joker uses a sledgehammer. His gas is loud, obvious. True fear, the kind that rewrites a soul, is a scalpel. It's tailored. It's intimate. You must learn a person's history, their private terrors, and build them a cage made of their own mind. Izuku would listen, absorbing it all. He didn't understand the joy Crane took in terror, but he understood the mechanics. Fear was a system, and all systems could be understood, predicted, and manipulated. Sometimes the lessons were more brutally simple. A chance encounter in the mess hall with Victor Zash, a man whose skin was a roadmap of his murders, each kill marked with a self-carved tally. Zash would grin, a horrifyingly empty expression, and point to a fresh mark on his forearm. See this one, kid? Janitor. Didn't look both ways. Right here, he'd tap a spot just below his own ribcage, is the subcostal nerve. Slice that, and they drop like a sack of rocks. Anatomy is key. Izuku would nod, his face pale, and commit the information to memory, filing it away in the vast, horrifying catalog of his education. But the one who provided the warped approximation of maternal care was Dr. Harleen Quinzel. Harley. To Izuku, she was Aunt Harley. She was the one who, after he'd scraped his knee practicing lockpicking on a maintenance grate, would plop him on her lap, disinfect the cut with contraband vodka that made him cry out, and stick a mismatched, brightly colored bandage on it. There you go, little puddin', she'd coo, her voice a jarring mix of baby talk and Brooklyn grit. All better. Her affection was real, in its own way, but just as twisted as everything else in Arkham. Her bedtime stories were not of fairy tale princes and sleeping beauties. They were epic, romanticized sagas of her and her puddin', the Joker. Tonight she found him after his lesson with Joker, sitting in his room, a large, disused storage closet in a forgotten sector, furnished with a cot, a single flickering bulb, and stacks of stolen books on engineering and psychology. Rough day at the office, sweetie? Harley asked, leaning against the doorframe, a giant wooden mallet resting on her shoulder. Izuku just shrugged. Don't let Mr. J get you down. He's just playing professor. She flopped down on the cot, making it groan in protest. Wanna hear a story? A real good one. He nodded, and she launched into it. Once upon a time, there was a brave, misunderstood knight with a smile that could light up the world, she began, her eyes distant and dreamy. But the kingdom was run by a grumpy, big-chin Bat King who was jealous of the knight's brilliance. The Bat King didn't like jokes, and he wanted everyone to be as sad and mopey as he was. So, one day, our knight decided the whole kingdom needed to smile. He concocted a magical potion. The story continued, a grotesque funhouse mirror version of one of Joker's rampages. The Joker's laughing gas was a magical potion, a bank robbery was liberating the king's greedy treasure for the common folk, and Batman was the villain, a joyless brute who couldn't stand to see anyone happy. Izuku listened, as he always did. He knew, with the cold certainty of his analytical mind, that it was a delusion. He had cross-referenced Harley's stories with the old newspaper's enigma used for his paper crafts. He knew the magical potion had left dozens in catatonic, grinning paralysis. He knew the liberated treasure was never seen again. But he let her tell it. He saw the genuine, desperate love in her eyes and some small, buried part of him, the part that hadn't yet been carved out and replaced with Arkham's logic, found it pitiable. It was another vulnerability to be noted, but for Harley, he kept that note to himself. After she'd kissed his forehead, leaving a smear of red lipstick, and bounced away, humming a cheerful, off-key tune about dynamite, Izuku was finally alone. This was the only time he was truly himself. He reached under his thin, lumpy mattress and pulled out his most prized possession, a thick, leather-bound ledger stolen from the accounting office months ago. It was his real schoolbook. On the front, in a meticulously neat, coded script of his own invention, a mix of binary, chemical symbols, and musical notation, was the title, the Arkham Index. Other boys his age might have notebooks filled with drawings of heroes. Izuku's was filled with the brutal truth of his world. Each page was dedicated to an inmate, or a guard. He didn't analyze their quirks. He analyzed their minds, their habits, their breaking points. Subject J. Crane Scarecrow. Primary motivation, intellectual vanity. Secondary, sadism. Fears anonymity, being proven wrong. Exploit. Challenge his methodology with superior data. He becomes flustered, his academic detachment fails. Subject O. Cobblepot Penguin. Primary motivation, respect perceived. Secondary greed. Fears mockery, being seen as a freak. Exploit. Treat him with theatrical deference to gain his trust. Subtle insults to his appearance will trigger disproportionate rage. Subject H. Quinzel, Harley. Primary motivation, Joker's approval. Fears, Joker's abandonment. Vulnerability, unconditional affection. Note, her psychosis is cyclical, dependent on Joker's proximity and mood. Highly unpredictable, but fundamentally non-malicious towards me. And then, the most complex and dangerous entry. Subject J. Father. Primary motivation, the subversion of order. He does not seek victory, he seeks to prove his thesis, that all is meaningless. Fears, irrelevance, being understood, predictability. Exploit unknown. All attempts to establish a predictable pattern have failed. He is chaos theory personified. To predict him is to misunderstand him. Treat as a force of nature, not a person. Survival is dependent on being an interesting, unpredictable variable, but never a threat to the core narrative. He filled pages and pages, his hand moving with feverish intensity. This was his control. In a world of absolute chaos, this book was his island of logic. It was how he survived. His innate, analytical nature, the one that would have made him the world's greatest hero analyst, was twisted here into a tool for parsing madness. But there was another secret inside him, one that didn't fit into the index. A stubborn, foolish spark of empathy that his entire upbringing was designed to extinguish. He nurtured it in secret, like a prisoner tending a single, illicit flower. A few weeks ago, it had been a mouse. One of the guards had set a sticky trap, and Izuku had found a small field mouse caught in it, squeaking in terror. His first thought, the Arkham thought, was a lesson in futility. The mouse is weak, the trap is strong. This is the natural order. But then he saw its frantic, tiny struggles, its black bead eyes wide with panic. He felt a pang in his chest, an illogical, inefficient emotion. Annoyed with himself, he had used the stolen solvent to carefully free the mouse, watching it scurry away into a crack in the wall. He had told no one. Tonight, it was something more. A new guard had started this week. A young man named Officer Miller. He was different. He didn't have the dead-eyed resignation of the veterans or the jumpy fear of the other rookies. He was kind. He'd smiled at Izuku once, a real smile, not a performance. He had even tried to slip him a chocolate bar, which Izuku had refused, knowing it was a breach of protocol that could get Miller hurt. Izuku knew, from chatter he'd overheard, that some of the more boorish guards were planning a hazing for Miller. A classic Arkham prank, which usually involved something humiliating and disgusting. He'd cross-reference the guards involved with their inmate contacts, and deduce the plan. The guards would use a low-level inmate to stage a fight, drawing Miller into a specific cell block. Once inside, another inmate, paid off with cigarettes, was going to activate a jury-rigged sprinkler head connected not to water, but to the holding tank of the asylum's sewage treatment system. It was a stupid, cruel prank. Joker would have found it mildly amusing. Harley would have giggled. Izuku was supposed to see it as another data point on the meaningless cruelty of man, but all he could picture was Officer Miller's kind, naive smile. A vulnerability. Dr. Eris's vulnerability. A thing to be exploited. Izuku felt a war raging in his chest. To intervene was to break the rules. His rules. Observe, analyze, survive. Do not engage. Engagement was a risk. It could be traced back to him, and if Joker found out he'd helped a guard, the consequences were unimaginable. He sat on his cot for a long time, the rhythmic drip-drip-drip from the west wing counting down the minutes. Finally, with a soft groan of frustration, he stood up. He moved through the asylum's back corridors like a ghost. His father's first and most important lessons were on stealth. Be the thing they forgot was there. Be the silence between the screams. He knew every loose floorboard, every security camera's blind spot, every guard's patrol route. He was a native of this jungle. He found Officer Miller in a small security nexus, nervously sipping a cup of coffee, his eyes darting at the banks of monitors. Izuku slipped a note, written on a scrap of paper in his coded script, onto a tray of paperwork Miller was about to file. He was gone before the guard even noticed it. Miller picked up the note, confused. It was gibberish. Chemical formulas and strange symbols. He almost threw it away, but something about the neatness of it, the deliberate structure, made him pause. He wasn't a genius like Nigma, but he'd been a chemistry minor in college. He recognized the symbol for sucrose, C12H22011, and an arrow pointing to a diagram that looked vaguely like a coffee pot, and then a much more universal symbol, a skull and crossbones. He looked at his own coffee cup. He looked at the communal pot in the break room. He thought about the odd, bitter aftertaste. With a jolt of alarm, he remembered hearing the older guards laughing about sweetening his coffee with the high-powered laxatives they kept in the infirmary for certain patients. His face went pale, then red with anger and embarrassment. He poured the rest of his coffee down a drain. Just then, his radio crackled. All units, code blue in cell block C. Inmate altercation. Miller, your closest, respond. It was the call. The setup. But now, Miller was not naive. He was angry. He was suspicious. He keyed his mic. Copy that. But be advised, I'm logging a potential hazing incident. Tell Sergeant Brody the coffee tastes like cheap revenge. I'll be taking the long route through Block D and advise a full sprinkler system check in C Block before I enter. There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio, followed by a string of curses. The altercation mysteriously de-escalated. From his hiding spot down the hall, Izuku watched. He felt a strange, warm flutter in his stomach. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't glee. It was satisfaction. A problem solved. A system corrected. It was a feeling utterly alien to Joker's philosophy. It felt good. And that terrified him. He scurried back to his room, his mind racing. It was a dangerous deviation from his programming. A bug in the system. He needed to be more careful. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the change in his room until he was inside. The single, flickering bulb was out. The only light was a pale, electronic glow from the corner. A portable television, small and ancient, was sitting on a crate. It must have been scavenged by Harley. It was on, the volume turned down to a bare whisper. On the screen, a news report. A building was on fire, smoke billowing into the sky. And then, a figure burst from the flames, carrying 3 people. The figure was huge, a mountain of muscle with 2 distinct tufts of blonde hair that stood up like rabbit ears. His costume was a blindingly bright medley of red, white, and blue, but it was his face that captivated Izuku. He was smiling. A huge, unwavering, utterly genuine smile, even as he performed an impossible feat of strength. "I am here!" The man's voice boomed from the tiny speaker, a sound so full of conviction and power that it seemed to push back the asylum's oppressive atmosphere. Izuku stared, mesmerized. He had heard of this man. All Might. The symbol of peace. In Joker's stories, he was the butt of every joke, the ultimate straight man, a brainless buffoon whose entire ideology was a house of cards. But Izuku, the boy who dissected lies for a living, could see no deception here. The smile wasn't a performance like Penguin's tears. The confidence wasn't a mask like Crane's. It was real. It was an absolute. In a world of shifting variables and chaotic equations, All Might was a constant. A piece of data that broke every rule Izuku had ever learned. He was illogical. He was impossible. And he was magnificent. Izuku didn't realize he had taken a step closer, his hand reaching out as if to touch the screen, his analytical mind completely overwhelmed by a raw, unidentifiable emotion. The big man himself. The voice was a silken dagger in the dark. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. The Joker was standing in the doorway, his form silhouetted by the dim hallway light, that terrible grin plastered on his face. He had been watching. How long had he been watching? Izuku's mind raced, cycling through every lesson, every protocol. He knows. He saw my face. He saw the punishment is imminent. What form will it take? Physical? Psychological? A new, more terrible lesson? The Joker glided into the room, his eyes fixed on the television, where All Might was giving a thumbs up to a cheering crowd. He didn't look angry. He looked delighted. He came to stand behind Izuku, placing his hands on the boy's small, trembling shoulders. The grip was paternal, yet possessive, like a collector admiring his rarest piece. "Look at him, Deku," the Joker whispered, his voice dripping with theatrical wonder. So strong. So simple. So painfully, beautifully linear. He runs in, he punches the bad guy, he saves the day, and everyone cheers. They believe in him. They believe it's that easy. He gestured to the screen with a flourish. He is the biggest, straightest line in the whole city. The most predictable variable. The most earnest, boring, and obvious setup in the history of the world. The Joker leaned down, his chin resting communication Izuku's hair, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss that was more terrifying than any scream. Izuku could feel the vibrations through his skull. "And you, my boy, you see that, don't you? You're fascinated. You're trying to figure him out. Good." The Joker's grin seemed to stretch impossibly wider in the gloom. He squeezed Izuku's shoulders, a gesture of profound, bone-chilling pride. "He's the setup," the Joker repeated, his voice full of insane, fatherly love. For the greatest joke of all. 4 years was a long time. In the world outside, it was the length of a high school education, a time of growth, change, and blossoming identity. In Arkham, it was an eternity, a slow, grinding passage of identical days measured in meal trays and medication schedules. For Izuku, now 14, it had been a postgraduate course in the art of unraveling the human mind. His body was still small for his age, wiry and coiled, but his eyes held the ancient, weary knowledge of a man who had stared into the abyss for a lifetime and found it educational. The war room was the asylum's long decommissioned boiler room. The air was thick with the ghost of burnt coal and the fresh scent of rust. A single, bare bulb, jury-rigged to a stolen car battery, cast long, dancing shadows that made the hulking, silent boilers look like slumbering iron beasts. Spread across a large, makeshift table, a wooden door laid over 2 sawhorses, were the blueprints for the Musutifa Central Police Precinct. They were crisp and clean, a recent acquisition courtesy of a Riddler-affiliated hacker with a gambling problem. "Pop quiz, hotshot. The Joker's voice echoed off the damp concrete walls, sharp and giddy. He leaned over the blueprints, his lanky frame draped in his signature purple suit, a stark slash of color in the monochrome decay. He tapped a long, pale finger on the building's ventilation schematic. The GCPD, pardon me, the MCPD, so provincial, has a state-of-the-art air filtration system. Designed to stop tear gas, airborne toxins, you name it. The question, my dear Deku, is not what it stops, but how it stops it. Izuku didn't look up from his own study of the schematics. It uses a positive pressure system combined with ionized carbon filters, he recited, his voice a flat monotone. Air is drawn from the roof, passed through the filters, and then forced into the building's ductwork at a higher psi than the ambient atmosphere. Any breach in the building's envelope results in air flowing out, not in. Standard procedure for secure facilities. Boring, Joker sang, waving a dismissive hand. But correct. So, a frontal assault with my classic Smilex is out. A real shame, the classics are classics for a reason. But a good artist must adapt his medium, therefore, we go for the personal touch. He gestured to a row of objects laid out neatly on a nearby crate. They were Izuku's school supplies. First, there were 3 small, metallic discs. Joker gaslight, Joker explained, picking one up and holding it to the light. My own special brew. Not the permanent rictus grin of the good old stuff. That's for a grand opening, not a preview. This is the Giggle Fit blend. It targets the cerebellum and frontal lobe, inducing 30 minutes of uncontrollable, debilitating laughter. Non-lethal, but awfully hard to aim a sidearm when you're crying with mirth. Your target, the central air intake on the roof. The filters will catch most of it, but not all. It'll just be enough to make the third shift unprofessional. Next to the discs were what looked like party poppers, but with a sinister, metallic sheen. Confetti bombs. Harley Quinn chimed in. She was perched on a rusted pipe, swinging her feet like a child. She had lovingly assembled these herself, except the confetti is made of razor-thin, sharpened aluminum foil. It won't kill anyone, probably, but it's a real devil to get out of your uniform. And your skin? Tee-hee. Her giggle was a stark contrast to the viciousness of the device. Finally, there were several small audio lures, each the size of a matchbox. Joker picked one up and pressed a button. A tinny, horribly cheerful loop of Harley singing Pop Goes the Weasel filled the room. Joker winced and turned it off. And these little beauties, he said, are for misdirection? Stick them in lockers, under desks, in the toilet tank? The goal isn't damage, Deku. The goal is to turn their safe space, their little fortress of order, into a circus. You are not a sledgehammer tonight. You are a poltergeist. Your mission is infiltration, placement, and exfiltration. No witnesses. No direct contact. You are a whisper. A rumor. A bad joke they can't quite figure out. This was it. His final exam. For months, Joker had been orchestrating this night. He'd bribed, blackmailed, and terrorized half the asylum staff. A minor riot in the East Wing, a manufactured gang war in Cell Block D, all of it was misdirection, a grand stage magician's flourish to draw the audience's eye while the real trick happened elsewhere. The breakout wasn't about escape. Joker could get out whenever he truly wanted to. Tonight was about one thing only, unleashing his protégé. Nervous? Harley asked, sliding off the pipe and coming over to fuss with the collar of Izuku's plain gray hoodie. His costume was anonymity, worn cargo pants, scuffed boots, and the hoodie. He looked like any other sullen teenager in the city, perfectly invisible. Izuku didn't answer. He felt a cold, clinical calm. He had memorized the blueprints. He had calculated the guard patrol routes based on 6 weeks of covert observation of their shift changes. He knew the camera blind spots, the faulty magnetic lock on the 3rd floor fire escape, and the precise decibel level of the building's ambient hum. It was just another problem set. A very, very complex one, but a problem set nonetheless. Joker seemed to read his mind. Don't be so clinical, my boy. Where's the showmanship? The pizzazz? This is your debut. Your coming out party. You're not just planting devices. You're signing your name. You are the opening act for a whole new kind of comedy. He leaned in, his smile gone, his green eyes burning with a zealot's fire. They have their symbol of peace. Their rock. Their predictable, boring hero. Tonight you will be the first crack in that foundation. You will show them that their safety is an illusion, their order a temporary convenience. You will make them check under their beds. You will be the joke they don't get. Now go make me laugh. The riot was a symphony of chaos conducted by a master. Alarms blared, a discordant choir of shrieking electronics. The strobe lights of the emergency system pulsed, turning the asylum corridors into a flickering, black and red nightmare. Inmates, freed by Harley's expert sabotage of the cell locks, ran amok. It was a beautiful, glorious distraction, and through it all, Izuku moved in the opposite direction. He didn't run. He flowed. While the chaos pulled everyone towards the main wings, he slipped into the quiet, forgotten service tunnels. He moved with the unnatural grace of someone who had spent his life learning to be unseen. The sounds of the riot faded behind him, replaced by the familiar dripping of pipes and the hum of old wiring. He squeezed through a maintenance grate, one he had loosened years ago, and dropped into the asylum's laundry outflow tunnel. The stench was horrific, a mix of industrial bleach and human filth. He ignored it. It was just data. A few minutes of crawling through the cramped, damp darkness, and he came to the final iron grill. The lock was old, rusted, a Century 7 model. He pulled a set of tension wrenches and picks from his pocket, a gift from Harley for his 12th birthday, engraved with little smiling faces. His fingers moved with the delicate precision of a surgeon. Click. Click. Thunk. The lock gave way. He pushed the grill open and poked his head out into a thicket of overgrown bushes. And then he froze. The air. It was the first thing that hit him. It wasn't the dead, recycled soup of Arkham. It was alive. It was cold and damp, carrying the smells of wet earth, distant car exhaust, and something green and living he couldn't identify. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his lungs, so accustomed to poison, feeling scoured clean. It was overwhelming. Then came the light. Not the flickering fluorescence, or the stark pulse of an alarm, but a cacophony of light. The soft, orange glow of sodium vapor streetlights, the sharp, white beams of passing cars, the distant, shimmering tapestry of the Musitifus skyline. It was beautiful and terrifying, and the sound. The constant, low roar of the city. 1,000 engines, 1,000 conversations, the distant wail of a different kind of siren. His ears, tuned to the specific acoustics of the asylum, were assaulted. He felt a wave of sensory vertigo, a system overload. For a moment, his analytical mind stuttered, unable to process the sheer volume of new data. Focus, a voice in his head commanded. It was Joker's voice, sharp and mocking. The world is loud, kid. Learn to filter out the noise, or you'll drown in it. Izuku gritted his teeth, forcing the sensory input into familiar boxes. Atmospheric particulates, nitrogen oxides from vehicle emissions estimated at 40 parts per million, sodium vapor streetlights dominant, wavelength approximately 589 nanometers. Ambient decibel level, 85 dB, sustained exposure could lead to auditory damage. Pedestrian traffic moderate. Avoid eye contact. Match stride and posture to the norm. He became the ghost again. He pulled his hood low and merged with the shadows of the street, moving with a purpose that made other pedestrians unconsciously give him a wide berth. He was a shark gliding through a school of fish. He didn't belong, but he knew how to navigate their waters. The precinct was a blocky, brutalist monument to order. It seemed to radiate an aura of stern authority. Izuku felt a flicker of the contempt Joker had instilled in him. A castle made of sand, waiting for the tide. He didn't approach the front. He circled the block, his eyes scanning, matching the physical building to the blueprints in his mind. He found his entry point, the third-floor fire escape, just as the plans indicated. The mag lock on the access door was, as his intel suggested, faulty. A strong, precisely applied jolt from a homemade taser-like device he'd built from a camera flash capacitor was enough to short the circuit. The lock clicked open. He was inside. The silence here was different from Arkham's. It was a clean, orderly silence, punctuated by the soft hum of computers and the distant murmur of a radio. He moved through the darkened hallway, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the linoleum. First, the roof. Up a flight of service stairs, another simple lock, and he was out on the gravel-covered rooftop, the city spread out before him like a glittering circuit board. He located the air intake, a large, hooded vent. Working quickly, he pried open the service panel and placed the 3 discs of Joker gas light inside, right before the primary filter housing. They were set on a 30-minute timer. Enough time for him to get clear, back inside. He moved from floor to floor, a phantom of mischief. He slipped an audio lure into the coffee machine's water reservoir in the second-floor break room. He taped another under the main dispatch console. He opened a detective's locker. The nameplate read Sakachi, and placed a confetti bomb inside, rigged to the door. He worked with a detached, chilling efficiency. This was not a game to him. It was a procedure. His last stop was the sergeant's office on the ground floor. He slipped under the desk and taped the final audio lure to the underside. As he was backing out, his eyes caught something on the desk. It was a framed picture. A smiling man, presumably the sergeant, with his arm around a woman, and a small girl with bright pink hair sitting on his shoulders. They were at a park. They were laughing. Izuku stared at the picture. He had seen laughter before. He'd seen Harley's adoring laugh, Riddler's manic laugh, and worst of all, Joker's soul-destroying laugh. But this was different. This was the laughter of the All Might news report. It was genuine. Uncomplicated. It was a piece of data that didn't fit his models. It was happy. He felt a strange ache in his chest, a hollow feeling he couldn't name. He shook his head, annoyed. Irrelevant data. Emotional contaminant. He finished his work and slipped back out into the night, the mission complete. He was halfway to the designated extraction point, an abandoned subway entrance, when he heard the cry. It was a sharp, terrified sound, quickly muffled. It came from a narrow, garbage-strewn alley between a closed noodle shop and a pawn store. His programming was clear: do not engage. Do not deviate. Your mission is complete. Joker would expect him to find it funny. A little slice of urban life's dark comedy. He was supposed to walk on. Laugh, even. He couldn't. Against every instinct that had been drilled into him for a decade, he stopped. He peered into the alley's mouth. The scene was a cliché. A hulking man, smelling of cheap liquor, had a woman pinned against the brick wall. He held a grimy knife to her throat, his other hand tearing at her purse. The woman was shaking, tears streaming down her face. The setup, Joker's voice hissed in his memory. The strong preying on the weak. It's comedy. It's the whole damn show. Laugh, Deku. But Izuku didn't see a joke. He saw the woman's face. He saw her terror. It wasn't the theatrical, performed fear of Arkham's inmates trying to manipulate a doctor. This was real. His mind, unbidden, began to analyze. Subject's cortisol and adrenaline levels at maximum. Pupils fully dilated. Vocal cords constricted by panic and physical pressure. She is in genuine mortal danger. And then, a new thought, an intrusive, alien piece of code inserted itself into his analytical stream. This is wrong. The word echoed in the silent chambers of his mind. Wrong. It was not a concept that existed in Joker's curriculum. There was only chaos and order, the joke and the straight man. The idea of a moral absolute was a fantasy for children and heroes. Yet here it was. A stubborn, undeniable truth. He looked at his own hands. Small. Quirkless. He had no brute strength. A direct confrontation would be suicide. But he wasn't a hero. He wasn't All Might. He was the Joker's student. He had other weapons. He stepped out of the shadows and into the alley's entrance, a small, unassuming figure cloaked in gray. The mugger, startled, spun around. Get out of here, kid! This ain't your business. Izuku didn't flinch. He just stood there, his face half hidden by his hood, and began to speak. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the tense air like a shard of glass. Your stance is unbalanced, he said, his eyes flicking over the man. You're favoring your right leg. Old injury? Or just sloppy? The alley is a tactical dead end. The only exit is behind me. You chose poorly. The man blinked, confused. What did you say, you little freak? Izuku took a step forward. He was using Riddler's lesson, deconstruct your opponent's confidence with cold, inescapable logic. The police precinct is 400 meters from here. Their average response time to a street-level panic button alert, which she could have if her phone is in her pocket, is 3.2 minutes. You've been here for at least 1 minute. The window for a clean escape is closing. The mugger's bravado began to curdle into uncertainty. This wasn't the reaction he expected. He tightened his grip on the woman. I'll cut her. I swear I will. Now came Scarecrow's lesson. Find their private fear. Build them a cage of their own mind. Izuku's eyes had already catalogued the man. The cheap, faded spiderweb tattoo on his neck. The way his eyes kept darting towards the mouth of the alley, towards escape. The slight tremor in his hand that wasn't from adrenaline, but from withdrawal. You're not afraid of cutting her, Izuku whispered, and his voice was suddenly chilling, intimate. You're afraid of being trapped. That's why you chose the spiderweb, isn't it? The irony. You see yourself as the spider, the predator. But you're just the fly. Small. Buzzing. Stuck. You can already feel the strands, can't you? The police, the prison, the cell. Another cage. Just a smaller, tighter box than the one you're already in. The man's eyes went wide. It was as if this strange, small boy had peeled back his skull and was looking directly at his soul. Who are you? He stammered. And now, the final lesson. The Joker's lesson. Theatrics. Izuku slowly pushed back his hood. He didn't break into a manic grin. He did something far more unsettling. He gave a small, sad, knowing smile. A smile of profound pity. I'm the punchline, he said softly. And the joke's on you. It was too much. The logical fallacies of his position, the psychic intrusion into his deepest fears, and the final, incomprehensible weirdness of the boy's statement, it all combined to shatter the mugger's nerve. He let out a choked sob, shoved the woman away, and scrambled past Izuku, dropping the knife and the purse as he fled into the night. The alley was silent again, save for the woman's ragged breathing. She slid down the wall, clutching her throat. She looked at Izuku, her eyes filled not with gratitude, but with a new kind of terror. What she had just witnessed was not a rescue. It was an exorcism. Before either of them could say another word, a new presence made itself known. There was no sound, no warning. One moment, the alley was empty save for them. The next, a figure was standing at the entrance, silhouetted against the streetlights. The figure was tall and lean, dressed in black, with a long, gray scarf that seemed to float around his neck with a life of its own. His tired, bloodshot eyes glowed with a faint, menacing red light. Stay right there, kid. The voice was low, devoid of emotion, but it carried an absolute authority. You have some explaining to do. Izuku's brain, momentarily sidetracked by the foreign sensation of doing something right, snapped back into its primary function, analysis and survival. Subject, unknown pro-hero. Costume, minimalist, practical. Black. Indicates preference for stealth. Support gear, scarf, material unknown, animated. Likely part of quirk. Posture, low center of gravity, coiled, ready for capture, not concussive force. Primary weapon, scarf. Eyes glowing. Likely activation condition for quirk. He looks exhausted. High energy cost quirk, or just chronically overworked. The hero's eyes were locked on him. The scarf was writhing like a nest of snakes. Hypothesis, quirk is sight dependent. The glow is the tell. He negates abilities by looking at them. A Power Erasure quirk. The hero, Eraserhead, was processing his own bizarre data set. A quirkless-looking kid in a hoodie. A terrified victim. A fleeing perpetrator who wasn't injured, just broken. The kid hadn't thrown a punch. He talked. Aizawa had heard the last part. It was the strangest, most unsettling display of vigilante justice he had ever encountered. I'm not going to ask you again, Aizawa said, his scarf beginning to lash out. Izuku met his gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only the cold light of calculation. He had one option. Not to fight, but to vanish. He reached into his pocket, and his fingers closed around a small, hard pellet. A gift from Harley. For dramatic exits, she'd said. It's illogical to stay when the parameters have changed, Izuku stated calmly, as if discussing a math problem. Then, he crushed the pellet in his fist and threw it at the ground. There was a sharp hiss and the alley was instantly flooded with a thick, choking cloud of gray smoke. It wasn't toxic, but it was incredibly dense. Aizawa's vision was completely obscured. He cursed, his quirk rendered instantly useless. He couldn't erase what he couldn't see. He lunged forward into the smoke, his scarf shooting out to ensnare his target. It met only empty air. He swept the small area, a space no bigger than a large closet. Nothing. He burst out of the smoke cloud, scanning the street. It was empty. The boy had vanished. He hadn't just run, he had evaporated. The smoke began to clear, revealing the still trembling woman and the dropped purse. Aizawa keyed the small radio on his collar. Eraser head to dispatch. I have a 10-54, violent mugging, on 12th and Elm. Suspect fled, victim is safe. But I need a flag put out. Vigilante activity. Possible juvenile. No quirk detected, but he is dangerous. Extremely dangerous. He stood there for a long moment, the last wisps of smoke curling around his boots. The kid hadn't fought like a hero. He hadn't brawled like a thug. He'd fought with psychology, with logic, with fear itself, and his eyes. Aizawa had seen a lot of things in his line of work, but he had never seen eyes like that. They were the eyes of a child who had lived 1,000 years in hell, who looked at the world not as a home, but as a puzzle to be solved or a threat to be dismantled. Who was he? And more importantly, who taught him to fight like that? Eraserhead, a man who prided himself on logic and rationality, was left with a deeply illogical and disturbing mystery. He had a feeling it was a mystery that was only just beginning. The atmosphere in Arkham was electric. It was a tangible thing, a low, humming thrum that vibrated in the fillings of your teeth and raised the hair on your arms. The inmates felt it, their usual drone of madness sharpening into an eager, predatory buzz. The guards felt it, their hands straying more often to their sidearms, their faces tight with a familiar dread. It was the feeling of a storm gathering just over the horizon, a pressure drop that promised lightning. The Joker was planning something. Something big. For Izuku, this feeling was as normal as the changing of seasons, an event that occurred every year or two with theatrical predictability. He sat in his closet room, cross-legged on his cot, methodically cleaning the tools of his trade. Lockpicks were wiped with oil, the small EMP device was recalibrated, and the coded pages of his Arkham Index were updated with fresh observations. He was the calm eye of the coming hurricane, his mind a fortress of cold, dispassionate logic. His field trip had ended with a silent, ghostly return to the asylum through the same squalid tunnels he'd used to leave. He had arrived back in his room just as the first rays of dawn were painting the grimy, barred window a shade of bruised purple. The Joker had been waiting for him, sitting on his cot, idly shuffling a deck of cards. He hadn't asked for a report. He didn't need to. He simply looked up, his smile a thin, sharp line. "Did you have fun?" he'd asked. Izuku had only nodded. "Good," Joker had replied, and that was that. The passing grade. But the incident in the alley had left a fracture in Izuku's carefully constructed psyche. A hairline crack in the mirror, the memory of the woman's genuine terror, the mugger's pathetic fear, and the strange, unsettling satisfaction of making things right. It was a subroutine running in the background of his mind, a piece of code that didn't compute. He had logged it in his index under a new, heavily encrypted file titled aberration_01. He treated it like a virus to be quarantined and studied, not an experience to be felt. The breakout was scheduled for tonight. Joker called it the grand unveiling. It was his masterpiece, a symphony of insanity years in the making. Every inmate had a part to play, every corrupt guard a role to perform. It wasn't a riot, it was a meticulously choreographed ballet of destruction. Deku! Showtime! Harley's voice, bubbly and bright, cut through his concentration. She stood in his doorway, bouncing on the balls of her feet, her oversized mallet resting on her shoulder. She wore her classic red and black harlequin outfit, her face painted a stark white. It was her battle dress. Puddin's ready for the overture. Izuku tucked his notebook under his mattress, a final, secret act of preservation. He put on his gray hoodie, the unofficial uniform of his anonymity. He followed Harley through the twisting, forgotten corridors of Arkham's underbelly, the pathways he knew better than his own reflection. They arrived in the asylum's central control room. It was already a scene of controlled chaos. The handful of on-duty guards were slumped in their chairs, grinning grotesquely, their eyes wide and vacant, victims of a preliminary dose of Joker's classic toxin, administered through the coffee maker. The main monitor bank, which usually showed 100 silent, grayscale views of the asylum's cells, was now a single, cycling image, a close-up of a chattering wind-up toy monkey clashing a pair of cymbals. The Joker stood before the main console like a conductor before his orchestra. He was immaculate, his purple suit freshly pressed, a lurid yellow flower on his lapel. "Ah, the guest of honor arrives," he announced without turning around. "Right on time. Punctuality is the courtesy of kings, and the necessity of clowns." His finger danced over the console, a blur of motion. "Harley, my sweet, phase 1, if you please." "You got it, Puddin'." With a gleeful cackle, Harley swung her mallet into a large, red emergency override panel on the wall. The plexiglass cover shattered, and she slammed her palm down on the button beneath. A deep, groaning shudder ran through the entire asylum as decades-old locking mechanisms, from the maximum security wing to the low-risk patient dorms, simultaneously disengaged. A chorus of triumphant roars and bestial howls rose from the depths of the building. The ballet had begun. Now, Joker turned to Izuku, his eyes glittering with a feverish intensity. "Your part. The secondary systems. Arkham's last little surprise for escapees. The automated turrets in the main corridors, the pressure plates in the service tunnels, the high-voltage perimeter fence. They were all upgraded 2 years ago. New software, new wiring. The old schematics are useless." He gestured to a secondary console, its screen filled with scrolling lines of code. "But they made a mistake. They put it all on a single, isolated network. Find the master control node. And break it." To brick the system meant to corrupt its firmware so completely that it became an inert, useless piece of electronics. It was a digital lobotomy. Izuku sat down. He didn't need to be told twice. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a pale blur in the dim light. This was his element. The system was complex, layered with firewalls and encryption protocols. To a normal hacker, it would take days. To the Riddler, it might take an hour. To Izuku, who had spent years learning to think like the madman who designed such systems, full of backdoors, vanity signatures, and logical flaws, it was a simple puzzle box. He found the lead programmer's signature hidden in a subroutine, a man named Kenji Takeda. A quick cross-reference with his mental index of the guard's gossip files revealed Takeda was a notorious gambler. Gamblers are lazy. They take shortcuts. Izuku bypassed the main encryption by searching for common lottery number combinations in the root password files. He was in within 5 minutes. He didn't just delete the code. That could be restored from a backup. He wrote a simple, elegant, and utterly destructive worm, a digital virus that would replicate itself, devouring every line of code, then overriding the boot sector with a single, repeating line of binary. Translate, HA. He set the worm to execute on a 30-second delay and pushed back from the console. Done. Joker clapped slowly. Subtle. Efficient. Lacking a certain theatrical flair, but undeniably effective. Excellent work, my boy. Outside the control room, the sounds of the riot were reaching a crescendo. Screams, explosions, the splintering of wood and the shattering of glass. Izuku could hear the distinct, guttural roars of Killer Croc and the high-pitched, maddening riddles of Nigma echoing down the hall. The heroes would be here soon. The police were already forming a perimeter. It was time to go. "Come on, Deku," Harley said, tugging his arm. "Let's blow this popsicle stand." But Joker held up a hand. "You go on ahead, my dear. Secure the vehicle. I need a private word with my protégé. A graduation ceremony of sorts." Harley pouted but obeyed, blowing a kiss. "Don't be long, Puddin'. The world's waiting for our big comeback tour." She skipped out of the room, her mallet leaving dents in the metal doorframe as she went. The room was suddenly quiet, save for the distant chaos and the chattering of the toy monkey on the screen. Joker walked over to the main window, which overlooked the asylum's front lawn. In the distance, the flashing red and blue lights of dozens of police cars formed a glittering, ineffective barricade. "Look at them," Joker mused, his tone almost gentle. "The little tin soldiers of order. They think these walls were built to keep us in. Such a lack of imagination." He turned to face Izuku, and the smile was gone again. His face, in the stark light, was a mask of cold, terrifying purpose. "The asylum is a classroom, Deku," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's a controlled environment. A safe space to learn the fundamentals. But you can't learn to swim on dry land. I've taught you everything I can within these walls. I've taught you how to read people, how to spot the lie. I've taught you that fear is a weapon, that logic is a cage, and that chaos is the only real freedom." He took a step closer. "But theory is nothing without practice. The world outside, that is the stage. A grand, chaotic, gloriously stupid theater. And it is filled, from top to bottom, with straight men, people who believe in rules, in fairness, in heroes. People who are just begging for a punchline." Izuku stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the shift in Joker's demeanor. This wasn't the manic clown or the cruel tormentor. This was the professor, the philosopher of madness, delivering his final lecture. "I am a bomb, Izuku," Joker said, using his real name for the first time in years. The name sounded alien, a word from another language. "I am loud, and I am messy, and I get their attention. But you are a virus. You get in quietly. You look like you belong. And you can rot their entire system from the inside out." He reached out and tilted Izuku's chin up, forcing the boy to meet his gaze. "They will try to fix you. The heroes, the doctors, the good, decent folk. They will see a broken boy and they will try to put you back together. Let them. Let them teach you their foolish little rules. Let them fill your head with their saccharine hopes. Learn their system better than they do. And when you are so far inside that they trust you, when they think you are one of them, you will turn it all into the punchline. You will be my masterpiece." Izuku felt a cold dread wash over him. This wasn't an escape plan. This was in deployment. He wasn't escaping with the Joker. He was being let go. As if on cue, a side door to the control room opened. A burly, low-level inmate, one of Joker's loyal brutes, stood there. He was dressed as a truck driver. "It's time, boss. The laundry truck is at the east gate, just like you said." Joker's grin returned, wider and more manic than ever. "Perfect timing." He grabbed a grimy backpack from behind the console and shoved it into Izuku's arms. It was heavy. "A little graduation present," he said cheerfully. "Cash, untraceable. A few fake IDs, all expertly made. A change of clothes. And a few party favors. For inspiration." He began to walk Izuku towards the door, his arms slung around the boy's shoulders in a grotesque parody of fatherly affection. "The truck is heading for the mainland. A little place called Muzurifu, full of heroes. Full of hope. A perfect laboratory for your postgraduate work." They reached the door. The inmate grunted and headed down the hallway. Joker stopped, turning Izuku to face him one last time. The sounds of battle were getting closer now. The distinct, booming voice of All Might could be heard, even from here. "Don't look so scared, kid," Joker chuckled. "This isn't goodbye. Think of it as independent study. I'll be watching. I'm your biggest fan. All the world's a stage, and I've got the best seat in the house." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a single playing card. The Joker. He pressed it into Izuku's hand, closing the boy's fingers around it. The card felt cold, its edges sharp. "Just in case you forget who you are," he whispered, and then, with a strength that belied his lanky frame, he pushed Izuku. Hard. Izuku stumbled forward, out of the control room and into the service corridor. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him, the sound of a bolt being thrown echoing in the confined space. He was locked out. He was alone. Panic, a raw, primal emotion he hadn't truly felt since he was a small child, clawed at his throat. His entire world, the mad, violent, but predictable ecosystem of Arkham had just been ripped away. He was being exiled from the only home he had ever known. "Follow me, kid," the inmate trucker grunted, already moving down the dark corridor. "Boss's orders." Izuku's feet moved on autopilot. His mind was a maelstrom of conflicting data and fractured emotions. He clutched the backpack to his chest, the Joker card digging into his palm. This couldn't be happening. It was a test. It had to be another one of Joker's cruel, elaborate tests. He would get to the truck, and Joker would be there, laughing, telling him it was all part of the joke. They navigated the maze of tunnels, the sounds of the riot fading and then growing again as they moved. They emerged into the asylum's massive laundry facility. The air was thick with steam and the smell of bleach. They climbed into the back of a large, grimy white truck filled with bags of soiled linens. The inmate pulled the rolling door down, plunging them into near-total darkness. A few moments later, the truck's engine rumbled to life. It lurched forward. Izuku braced himself against a stack of laundry bags, his heart hammering against his ribs. The truck stopped, and he heard the squeal of a gate opening. A gruff voice shouted something, then the truck moved again, picking up speed. They were out. They drove for what felt like an eternity. Izuku sat in the suffocating darkness, the stench of the laundry filling his nostrils, his mind a blank slate of shock. The truck eventually slowed and pulled into what sounded like a large, echoing warehouse. The back door rolled up, flooding the space with dim, dusty light. The driver hopped out. "This is it. End of the line," he grunted, not looking at Izuku. "You're on your own. Don't get caught." Without another word, he walked away, disappearing through a side door. Izuku slowly, hesitantly, climbed out of the truck. He was in a vast, abandoned distribution center. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight lancing through holes in the roof. He walked to the main loading bay doors, which were slightly ajar. He pushed one open and stepped outside. The sensory overload was 10 times worse than his first field trip. The world assaulted him. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the sky, a brilliant, piercing blue he'd only ever seen in pictures. The roar of traffic from a nearby elevated highway. The dizzying height of the skyscrapers that clawed at the horizon, their glass and steel skins gleaming in the afternoon sun. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his head as if to physically hold his fracturing thoughts together. He looked down the street and saw it. A building that was impossible to miss. It was a massive, sprawling campus composed of towering, H-shaped glass buildings. A symbol of everything his father despised. A place Joker always called the circus of self-righteous clowns. Yue High School. He was in Muzidifu. Joker had been telling the truth. He felt a terrifying, exhilarating, gut-wrenching sense of freedom. He was a creature of the deep sea suddenly dragged to the surface, the pressure change threatening to tear him apart. He had no mission, no handler, no rules but the ones he chose to follow. For the first time in his life, there was no one to tell him what to do. The silence was deafening. He sank to his knees on the cracked pavement of the loading dock, the heavy backpack beside him. The city roared on, oblivious to the small, broken boy who had just been released into its midst. A virus, Joker had called him. A time bomb. He opened his hand and looked at the card Joker had given him. The grinning, garish face of the jester stared back at him, seeming to mock his confusion. "Just in case you forget who you are, who was he? Was he Deku the puppet? Izuku, the ghost of a name? Or was he something new, something undefined, standing on the precipice of a world he was built to destroy?" He didn't know. And for the first time, the lack of an answer, the absence of data, didn't feel like a problem to be solved. It felt like a chasm opening beneath his feet. He was lost, profoundly and utterly lost in a world that was not a madhouse, but was, perhaps, just a different kind of asylum. The first week was a lesson in brutal, overwhelming freedom. The Joker's backpack had been, as promised, meticulously prepared. The cash was a thick, untraceable bundle of used bills. The fake IDs were flawless, bearing the name Haru Tanaka and a face that was a digitally aged and genericized version of his own. It was a blank identity for a blank slate. Izuku didn't seek out luxury. He sought anonymity. He found it in a forgotten corner of the city, a district of crumbling, post-war apartment blocks that the modern Musutafu had left behind. Here, the neon glow of the downtown core was a distant smear on the horizon, and the roar of the city softened to a constant, weary sigh. He paid a slumlord, a man with greasy hair and eyes that never quite met his, 3 months' rent in cash for a small, one-room apartment. No questions asked? The apartment was a cell, but it was his cell. It had a stained mattress on the floor, a single window that looked out onto a brick wall, and a faucet that dripped with the same maddening rhythm as the one in Arkham's West Wing. It was familiar. It was, in its own bleak way, comforting. His days were spent in observation. He was a xenobiologist studying an alien species. He sat in crowded plazas, on park benches, in the back of cheap noodle shops, and he watched. He didn't interact. He just analyzed. He studied the intricate, unwritten rules of this new asylum, the way people queued for a train, the specific cadence of a casual greeting, the complex social rituals of sharing a meal. It was all so illogical. Inefficient. In Arkham, every interaction was a transaction, a power play. Here, people performed small acts of kindness for no discernible gain. A woman helped an elderly man pick up his dropped groceries. A teenager gave his seat on the bus to a pregnant woman. These were aberrations, data points that broke his predictive models. He logged them all in a new, cheap notebook, a successor to his index, under the heading, Anomalous Altruism. He couldn't understand the motivation. It was a vulnerability with no apparent exploit. Society, he concluded, was built on a foundation of willful ignorance and fragile, unspoken trusts. It was, just as Joker had taught him, a house of cards. But it was functioning. People went to work, they laughed. They loved. They lived their lives inside this beautiful, intricate, and utterly nonsensical lie. And the lie was held together by one central pillar, the heroes. Heroes were everywhere. On billboards, on television commercials for energy drinks, their action figures grinning from storefront windows. They were a brand, a multi-billion-yen industry, but they were also real. He saw them patrol the streets, their colorful costumes absurdly bright against the drab cityscape. He watched them stop petty crimes with bombastic, over-the-top flair, posing for the cameras afterwards. It was performance, just like Penguin's tears, but the audience, the entire city, seemed to believe in it unconditionally. It was a mass delusion on an unprecedented scale. He dedicated an entire section of his new notebook to the symbol of peace, All Might. He consumed every piece of information he could find, old news footage, documentaries, fan forums. He deconstructed All Might's fighting style, a seemingly straightforward application of overwhelming force, but with subtle, predictive footwork. He analyzed his public speeches, noting the carefully calibrated use of reassuring platitudes and unwavering optimism. All Might wasn't just a person, he was a carefully crafted ideological weapon, designed to pacify the public and create a stable, predictable social order. He was the ultimate straight man, and Izuku, despite himself, was still fascinated. One afternoon, his observations led him to the shopping district near Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The area was bustling, a river of people flowing along the sidewalks. He was sitting on a bench, sketching the support structures of the elevated train line, when the sound of an explosion ripped through the air. It was close. His training, his Arkham instincts, screamed at him, flee. Observe from a distance. Do not engage. He stood up, ready to melt back into the crowd and disappear. But then he saw the direction of the crowd's flow. They weren't running away from the explosion. They were running towards it. A tide of morbid curiosity and hero worship, their phones held up like periscopes. This, too, was illogical. Drawn by a strange, academic curiosity, he allowed himself to be carried along with the current. He kept to the edge of the crowd, his small frame allowing him to slip through gaps, his senses on high alert. The source of the chaos was an underpass. A villain, a grotesque, amorphous being made of viscous green sludge, had taken a teenage boy hostage. The villain was a churning maelstrom of slime and eyeballs, its form constantly shifting. The hostage, a boy with explosive, ash-blonde hair, was submerged to his neck, his face a mask of rage and terror. He was fighting back, setting off small, contained explosions from his palms, but it was useless. It only made the sludge villain laugh, a wet, gurgling sound. A line of pro-heroes stood at a distance, holding back the crowd. Death Arms, a hero with superhuman strength, was trying to punch the sludge, but his fists just sank ineffectually into the fluid body. Backdraft was busy putting out the fires the hostage's quirk had started. Kamui Woods was there, but the narrow underpass gave him no room to maneuver, and the villain's volatile hostage made using his lacquered chain prison too risky. Izuku watched, his mind a cold, running commentary. Tactical failure. Heroes are mismatched for the threat. Death Arms is a brute force solution applied to a fluid dynamics problem. Ineffective. Kamui Woods is a capture specialist neutralized by environmental constraints. Backdraft is engaged in damage control, not threat neutralization. They are following their standard protocols, but the situation is outside their predictable parameters. They are paralyzed. He saw their expressions. They weren't heroes in that moment. They were just men and women out of their depth, their faces etched with frustration and a dawning, professional horror. The joke, he thought with a detached chill, was that their powers were useless. He was about to turn away. This was not his problem. It was just another example of the system's failure, another data point for his research. A live-action demonstration of Joker's thesis. But then he saw the hostage's eyes. Beneath the furious pride, beneath the explosive anger, he saw it. The same raw, primal terror he had seen in the woman's eyes in the alley. It was a look that said, "I am going to die here." The boy's struggles were becoming weaker, his explosions sputtering out as the sludge forced its way into his mouth and nose. And in that moment, something inside Izuku broke. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't heroism. It was an involuntary, system-wide failure of his core programming. His legs, which had been preparing to walk away, suddenly propelled him forward. He burst from the front line of the crowd, a small, gray blur against the backdrop of chaos. "Get back here, you idiot! You'll get yourself killed!" Death Arms yelled, but Izuku didn't hear him. His mind, which had been a calm sea of analysis, was now a raging tempest. "What are you doing? This is illogical. Suicide. Abort!" But another part of him, the buried part, the part that had freed the mouse and saved Officer Miller, was screaming even louder. He's dying! He didn't have a plan. He was running on pure, unadulterated instinct. The instinct of a boy who, in another life, would have run towards danger without a second thought. As he sprinted across the pavement, his eyes darted around, his analytical mind desperately trying to catch up with his body's treason. Threat, amorphous, fluid. Weakness? Must have a solid component. The eyes. The teeth. But they're too small, too protected. Direct assault is impossible. Need a distraction. A system shock. His gaze fell on a detail no one else had noticed. A few feet from the underpass was a damaged traffic light pole, knocked askew by the initial fight. Its maintenance panel was sprung open, revealing a thick bundle of electrical conduits. One of them, a heavy-gauge power line, was frayed, sparks occasionally spitting from the exposed copper. Hypothesis: a sudden, high-voltage electrical discharge could cause the villain's semi-liquid body to seize or momentarily solidify. A neurological shock. He didn't have a weapon. He only had his backpack. It was heavy, filled with his notebooks, a water bottle, and a few other miscellaneous items. It was a projectile. He was 20 feet away now. The sludge villain turned one of its many eyes towards him, a look of amused contempt on its face. A new skin suit? And a little one, too. Come on, kid, be a hero. Izuku didn't aim for the villain's eyes, as any normal person would have. That was the expected move. Instead, with a primal scream torn from the very depths of his soul, he swung the backpack off his shoulders and hurled it, not at the villain, but at the exposed electrical conduit. The heavy bag struck the frayed cable with a loud thwack. The result was immediate and spectacular. The impact tore the weakened cable completely loose. It whipped through the air like a live serpent, showering the area in a blinding shower of brilliant blue and white sparks. It was like a flash-bang grenade going off. The sludge villain, whose eyes were simple, unprotected photoreceptors, recoiled with a gurgling shriek of pain, momentarily blinded. The hostage, Katsuki Bakugo, found a single, precious second where the villain's grip slackened. He coughed, he choked, and he managed to gasp a lungful of air. That 1 second was all it took. Texas smash! The voice was a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the city. A blur of red, white, and blue shot past Izuku, a human missile propelled by righteous fury. All Might, in all his magnificent, terrifying glory, had arrived. He pulled his fist back, and the air itself seemed to compress around it. He drove his punch not at the villain, but at the ground just in front of it. The shockwave was apocalyptic. The wind pressure alone was like a solid wall. It hit the sludge villain and atomized it, scattering the green slime in every direction. The force was so immense it changed the weather, dark clouds overhead parting as a sudden downpour of rain began to fall. Silence. Then, the roar of the crowd. Izuku was on his hands and knees, the force of the blast having knocked him off his feet. His ears were ringing. He looked up, his heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. All Might stood there, silhouetted against the newly cleared sky, his fist still raised. He had saved the day. Of course he had. He was the constant. The absolute. The media swarmed. Paramedics rushed to Bakugo, who was coughing up sludge but otherwise unharmed, his pride clearly the most significant casualty. The other heroes began securing the scene, looking both relieved and deeply embarrassed. No one was looking at Izuku. He was just a kid in a gray hoodie who had thrown his backpack. He had been eclipsed by the sun. This was his chance to disappear. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed his backpack, its contents now surely a complete mess, and began to slip away into the chaos. He had broken protocol. He had engaged. He needed to get back to his cell and analyze his failure. Hold on, young man. The voice was not the booming baritone of a hero. It was thin, tired, and laced with a wheezing cough. Izuku turned. Standing before him was a skeletal man who looked like he was made of nothing but bones and regret. He was tall, with sunken cheeks, wild blonde hair that drooped sadly, and eyes that seemed lost in the cavernous shadows of their sockets. He was wearing a ridiculously oversized white t-shirt and baggy green cargo pants. But it was the same man. The face, stripped of muscle and bravado, was undeniably All Might's. Izuku froze. His mind, which had just begun to calm, went into overdrive. Physical transformation? A secondary quirk? Or the primary one? The muscle form is the illusion. This is the reality. Severe atrophy of the latissimus dorsi and pectoralis major. Labored breathing. Evidence of chronic respiratory condition. A past injury? That was a reckless, foolish thing you did, the skeletal man said, his voice quiet but firm. You could have been killed. Izuku stared at him, his face a blank mask. He offered no defense. The man's statement was factually correct. All Might, or Toshinori Yagi, as he was in this form, had seen the whole thing. He had been in the crowd, his time limit up, feeling the bitter shame of his own powerlessness. He had seen the other heroes fail, and then he had seen this small, quirkless boy. He could tell he was quirkless, there was no telltale energy about him. Charge in. He had seen the boy's eyes, not wide with heroic fervor, but narrowed in intense, terrifying calculation. He hadn't just acted. He had analyzed the situation and found the one, single vulnerability no one else had seen. The boy hadn't saved the day, but he had created the single second necessary for the day to be saved. He had inspired All Might to push past his limits. Why did you do it? Toshinori asked, genuinely curious. The other heroes had it handled. Izuku's head tilted slightly. That is an incorrect assessment, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Their tactical response was inadequate. Their quirks were mismatched for the nature of the threat. The hostage's survival probability was decreasing at a rate of 12% per minute. Your arrival was the unpredictable variable, but my action was a calculated necessity to create an opening. It was the logical thing to do. Toshinori was taken aback. This wasn't the answer he expected. There was no my legs just moved on their own. Or I couldn't just stand by and watch. There was only the cold, brutal logic of a battle computer. It was the most heroic, and yet least heroic thing he had ever witnessed. He looked at the boy, really looked at him. the gray, anonymous clothes. The way he stood, perfectly balanced, ready to bolt. The way his eyes never stopped scanning, cataloging, analyzing everything around him. And the eyes themselves, they were ancient. They held a deep, profound brokenness that Tashinori had only ever seen in soldiers returning from the front lines of a war. "What's your name, son?" he asked gently. Izuku hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Haru Tanaka." The lie slipped out flawlessly. Tashinori sighed. He knew it was a lie. This boy was a ghost. He was about to press him, but then his eyes fell on the backpack. A corner of a notebook was sticking out of a torn pocket. It was filled with a dense, almost microscopic script. And on the cover, a familiar, horrifying symbol had been doodled, almost unconsciously. A wide, manic grin, a cold dread, colder than any winter's day, washed over Tashinori. He had seen that smile in his nightmares for years. The smile of the man who had given him the very injury that was now slowly killing him. The smile of the Joker. Suddenly, some of the pieces began to click into place. The boy's cold logic. His unsettling knowledge of tactics and fear. His utter lack of social conditioning. This wasn't just a troubled kid, this was something else entirely. Tashinori made a split-second decision. A gamble. The biggest gamble of his life. He looked around. The crowd was being pushed back. They were relatively alone. "Kid," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Forget Haru Tanaka. Forget everything you think you know. I need to talk to you. Not as All Might. As me." He was about to say more, to lead the boy away, but Izuku interrupted him. The boy's gaze was fixed on him, his green eyes boring into Tashinori's very soul. The awe was gone, replaced by a scalpel-sharp curiosity. "Your ideology is a structural vulnerability," Izuku said, the words coming out in a quiet, intense rush. "The belief in a single, infallible symbol creates a critical point of failure for the entire social structure. If you fall, it all falls. It's an inefficient, high-risk system. So why does it work? Why do they believe in you when it's all so fragile?" The question hit Tashinori like a physical blow. It wasn't a fan's question. It wasn't a reporter's question. It was the question of a saboteur. It was the question a philosopher of chaos would ask. It was the Joker's question, spoken with a child's voice. Tashinori stared at the boy. This strange, broken, brilliant child who had just performed a selfless act for the most clinical of reasons. A boy who looked at the symbol of peace and saw not a savior, but a flaw in the system. In that moment, All Might saw two paths diverge. One path led to this boy, with his terrifying mind and his spark of buried goodness, becoming the next great villain, a monster of logic and chaos that would make the Joker look like a cheap party clown. The other path was a monumental risk. It was insane. It was illogical. But it was the only path he could see. He had been looking for a successor. Someone with a heroic heart. He had found something far more complicated. He had found a soul that needed saving, and a mind that could, if turned to the light, become the greatest strategic asset the heroes had ever known. He looked at the boy who saw the world as a joke, and he decided to offer him the one thing that was deadly serious. He decided to offer him the legacy of hope itself. The setting for the most important conversation of Izuku Midoriya's life was not a grand hall or a secret hero base, but a grimy, graffiti-scarred bench overlooking the trash-strewn sands of Dagoba Municipal Beach. The air smelled of salt, decay, and the faint, acrid tang of ozone from the earlier battle. The sun was beginning to set, painting the polluted sky in hues of orange and violent purple. It was a landscape of urban decay, a fitting backdrop for a meeting of two broken men. One was broken physically. Tashinori Yagi sat hunched on the bench, a gaunt scarecrow of a man, racked by a coughing fit that sounded like tearing fabric. He spat a gout of blood into a handkerchief, his hand trembling. The other was broken spiritually. Izuku stood a few feet away, his posture rigid, a sentinel of pure observation. His mind was still reeling from the impossible transformation he had witnessed. All Might, the unassailable mountain of muscle, had deflated into this fragile, skeletal creature. It was a magic trick, a sleight of hand on a biological level. It was the ultimate lie, and Izuku was captivated by its mechanics. This is my reality, young man, Toshinori wheezed, gesturing to his own emaciated frame. The form you see on television, that's me flexing. Like a guy at the pool sucking in his gut. He attempted a weak, self-deprecating smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. I can only hold it for about 3 hours a day now. And it's getting shorter. He lifted his oversized t-shirt. The scar was a nightmare. A craterous, spider-webbing mass of ruined flesh that covered most of the left side of his torso. It was a puckered, violent vortex of tissue, a permanent testament to an apocalyptic injury. Got this in a fight 5 years ago, Toshinori said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual heroic timbre. My stomach was destroyed. My entire respiratory system was surgically reconstructed. I'm on my last legs. Izuku stared at the wound, his analytical mind kicking into high gear, overriding the faint tremor of horror that ran through him. Massive tissue trauma. Non-regenerative. Force required to inflict such damage exceeds standard ballistic or bladed weaponry. Likely an impact-type quirk of catastrophic power. 5 years ago, cross-referencing news archives. No publicly reported battles of that magnitude. A secret fight. An unrecorded villain. It was him, wasn't it? Izuku asked, his voice quiet. He didn't need to say the name. The doodled smile on his notebook was evidence enough that he knew. The one you don't talk about. Toshinori's eyes, lost in their shadowy sockets, sharpened. Yes, he said, his voice a low growl. It was him. I put him away. But not before he did this to me. He is the reason the symbol of peace is on a time limit. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the cry of a distant gull and the rhythmic crash of polluted waves. Izuku was processing. Joker had always spoken of All Might with a theatrical, dismissive contempt, painting him as an invincible, brainless buffoon. But that had been a lie. A calculated omission. Joker knew All Might was wounded, was mortal. He had been waiting patiently for the symbol to crumble. The greatest joke wasn't just that heroes were foolish. It was that the strongest hero of all was a dying man propped up by bravado and a lie. Your question, Toshinori said, breaking the silence. You asked why it works. Why people believe in me when the system is so fragile. He leaned forward, his elbows on his bony knees, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Because they have to. This world, it's a chaotic place. Since the dawn of quirks, society has been in a constant state of low-grade upheaval. People need a pillar to lean on. They need to be able to look at the news after a disaster and see a smiling face telling them that everything will be okay. The symbol of peace isn't just for stopping villains. It's for stopping despair. I smiled to stave off the fear inside myself as much as the fear in others. He turned his head, his gaze locking with Izuku's. You see that fragility as a weakness. A structural vulnerability. I see it as a necessity. A load-bearing lie that holds up the world. Izuku felt a strange resonance with the statement. A load-bearing lie. The world of heroes and the world of villains weren't so different, after all. They were both built on performance, on illusions. The only difference was the intended outcome, order versus chaos. But you're right, Toshinori continued. It's a vulnerability. And I am failing. I need a successor. Izuku's eyes widened slightly. This was the crux of it. The conversation was moving from philosophy to transaction. I've been looking for someone, Toshinori said. Someone to inherit my power. My quirk. Izuku's internal monologue screeched to a halt. Inherit a quirk? Transference of metahuman ability is a theoretical concept. Only one known case in history, and it's shrouded in myth and conspiracy. Subject All Might is claiming this is possible? My quirk is not what people think it is, Toshinori explained, sensing the boy's disbelief. It is called One for All. The name seemed to hang in the air, imbued with a weight and history that defied the grimy surroundings. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. It is the crystallization of power. The one who wields it can cultivate that power and pass it on to another. A stockpile of strength, growing with each new user. He held up his trembling hand, clenching it into a fist. It is the power to fight back against the darkness. The power that chose me. And the power I now intend to pass on. I have been searching for a worthy vessel. Someone with a true, heroic spirit. He paused, and his gaze on Izuku was so intense it felt like a physical weight. And then I saw you today. A quirkless boy, with no hope of personal gain, charge into a hopeless situation. I saw you analyze the threat, find a solution, and act. It wasn't the blind courage of a hero. It was something else. Something more. Toshinori coughed again, a deep, rattling sound. I saw your notebook. I saw his smile. I don't know what your story is, young man. I don't know what horrors you've seen or what darkness has its hooks in you, but I know what I saw today. I saw a brilliant mind and a spark of selfless courage, buried under a mountain of pain. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a desperate, earnest whisper. I am making a monumental gamble. A leap of faith that would make my old master call me a fool. I believe that the boy who ran in to save that young man, not for glory, but because it was the logical thing to do, that boy has the makings of a hero. A different kind of hero, one who understands the fragility of it all. I am offering you my power, young man, Toshinori said, the words landing like hammer blows. I am offering you the chance to become the next symbol of peace. To inherit one for all. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Izuku's mind, the cold, analytical engine that had kept him alive in Arkham, simply stalled. It was a syntax error, a logical paradox of such magnitude that his entire operating system threatened to crash. Joker, his father, his creator, had raised him to be the punchline to the grand joke of heroism. And now, the joke's biggest straight man, the symbol of peace himself, was offering him the power to become the very thing he was designed to destroy. It was hilarious. A small, strangled sound escaped Izuku's lips. It was a dry, rasping noise, rusty from disuse. A laugh. It wasn't the Joker's manic cackle or Harley's gleeful giggle. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. A sound of a system breaking. You would give this power to me? Izuku managed to say, the words catching in his throat. You know nothing about me. For all you know, I could be a monster. Are you? Toshinori asked simply, his eyes unwavering. The question hung in the air. Was he? He had been raised by monsters, taught their catechisms of chaos and cruelty. He knew how to break a man's mind, how to build a bomb, how to spot and exploit every weakness. But he had also freed the mouse. He had saved the guard. He had run into a fight to save a boy he didn't even know. The data was contradictory. The conclusion was unknown. I don't know, Izuku answered, and it was the most honest thing he had ever said. That's a good enough answer for me, Toshinori said with a faint, genuine smile. Because it means you're willing to find out. He presented his offer not just as power, but as a hypothesis. A grand experiment. You see the world as a joke, my boy. As a flawed, broken system. I am giving you the tools to interact with that system on its highest level. I want to see what you do with it. Will you prove your father's thesis? Or will you prove him wrong? This power. It is the legacy of those who believe the world isn't a joke. The choice of what to do with it will be yours. This, Izuku understood. It wasn't a call to heroism. It wasn't an appeal to his better nature. It was a challenge. An experiment. Joker had given him his independent study, and now All Might was offering him a competing research grant. Ideology A. Chaos. Ideology B. Order. He was being given the chance to test both theories with an unprecedented level of resource. His life was no longer just an observation. It was now a controlled study. But there were conditions. I cannot simply give you this power and turn you loose, Toshinori stated, his tone becoming serious again. Your mind is a razor blade, but your soul is a battlefield. You need structure. You need a new kind of education. If you accept, you will enroll at UA High School. It is the safest place for you to learn to control this power. And it's the best place for us to deprogram you. Izuku bristled at the word. I am not programmed, aren't you? Toshinori countered gently. You've been taught to see the world through a specific lens. A lens of cynicism and chaos. Yui will give you a new one. You will be under my personal supervision, and also under the supervision of Principal Nizu. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew of Nizu. An animal with a high-spec quirk that granted him an intelligence surpassing any human. He was a master strategist, a psychological genius. In Joker's world, Niza was the only figure spoken of with a sliver of grudging respect, referred to as the rat in the ivory tower. To be under Niza's direct observation was to be placed under the world's most powerful microscope. It was terrifying. And intriguing. I will help you build a new life, Toshinori concluded. A new identity. A real one this time. We will give you a plausible backstory. We will give you a home. We will give you a chance. All you have to do is accept. Izuku looked from the dying hero to the dying sun. He thought of his damp, lonely apartment. He thought of the Joker's final, chilling words, "Make me laugh." He thought of the strange, warm satisfaction of saving Officer Miller, a feeling so alien and yet so compelling. This was the ultimate test. To accept this power was to engage with the world in a way he had never imagined. It was to step onto the stage, not as a saboteur in the wings, but as a lead actor. It was the most interesting, most unpredictable variable that had ever been introduced into his life's equation. How could he, a student of systems, refuse the chance to study the most powerful system of all from the inside? I accept, Izuku said. The words felt heavy, like stones in his mouth. He was accepting not out of heroic ambition or a desire for redemption. He was accepting as a scientist accepts a new, fascinating, and incredibly dangerous experiment. Toshinori's shoulders slumped with a relief so profound it seemed to take years off his face. He beamed, a genuine, radiant smile that was pure all-might, even in this withered form. Excellent. Wonderful, truly. He broke into another hacking cough, spitting more blood. Truly wonderful. He looked at Izuku, a wild, slightly mad glint in his eye. Well, no time like the present. To seal the deal, there's just one final, small step. He plucked a single strand of his wild blonde hair. It seemed to glow with a faint inner light. He held it out to Izuku. Eat this. Izuku stared at the hair. He stared at All Might. His mind, which had just rebooted, stalled once more. Subject, All Might. Note, in addition to unconfirmed quirk transference methodology, subject displays signs of profound eccentricity. Eat it? Izuku repeated, his voice flat. Yes. Toshinori said enthusiastically. To inherit my power, you have to ingest my DNA. It's how it works. Now, down the hatch. Izuku looked at the glowing hair. He thought of the vials in Scarecrow's lab, the strange concoctions of the asylum's kitchen, the unidentifiable stains on his cot. He had survived Arkham. He could survive this. With a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire, twisted childhood, he took the hair and swallowed it. It tasted faintly of ozone and regret. For a moment, nothing happened. He just stood there, feeling foolish. Then it began. It wasn't a rush of power. It wasn't a glorious transformation. It was a feeling like 1,000,000 volts of electricity being shot directly into his soul. A supernova of raw, untamed energy detonating in the core of his being. It was the combined will and strength of 8 generations of heroes, a roaring chorus of voices screaming a single, unified message of hope and defiance into the silent, cynical void of his heart. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was a power that could level a city block or lift the spirits of a nation. He staggered back, his hand flying to his chest, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. He didn't feel a heroic calling. He didn't feel a surge of righteousness. He felt a thrilling, horrifying surge of potential. The potential to save. The potential to destroy. The potential to turn the entire world into a joke so grand, so final, that even his father would be left speechless. The dormant virus Joker had planted in him suddenly had access to a nuclear arsenal. A slow, chillingly familiar smile stretched his lips. It was a faint echo of the one he had seen in the mirror 1,000 times, but this time, it was his own. He looked at All Might, who was watching him with a hopeful, nervous expression. The setup, Izuku whispered, his voice a low, excited hum, is now complete.